So I'm really excited about this next conversation. I think the title was something like "Building the Economy from Grassroots to Across the Globe," and we have just that represented here today. And so the program referenced a yes. Well, maybe it was meant to hear me outside. Hey, everybody outside. Yes. Apologies. I hope everyone made it to where they are. Okay, if you're not in here, you're missing out. Um, so thank you. There was a statistic, and it was referenced earlier about buying power as a compared to wealth and net worth. And so we have a group of industry experts who are going to talk about how they're addressing wealth disparities, wealth gaps, not only locally, but also internationally. And so we are joined by the lead economist, Savi Bisnath. No, it's important. Make sure people say your name right. Because I'm the same way. Savi Bisnath, who is the lead economist for the United Nations, working on addressing economic disparities in low and middle income countries. We're joined by Lakeisha French, who is the founder of Future in Color and shared a lot about what she is doing yesterday and shared a lot about the Black GDP and entrepreneurship. We're joined by Erica Smith, who represents Microsoft Philanthropies and is doing a lot of work around AI and technology. Emil referenced that earlier and is going to share the role of technology and the technology economy and the future of the economy. And then, of course, our very own treasurer, José Cisneros, who is leading some of the work locally here in San Francisco to combat those economic disparities in the communities that we serve. And so before we get into our conversation, we are going to welcome each of them to provide an overview about what it is that they're doing and how they're leading this work in their respective roles. And so we're going to first hear from Savi, and then we are going to hear from Lakeisha, Erica, and Jose, respectively. So Savi, I believe you want to be at the podium, and I will take a seat. I will hold your belongings. Or you, no, you can, yes. Okay. Perfect. And then we are going to have so much time for Q&A. So because we want to make sure you leave with what you came for, and you have the tools necessary to apply what you learn as we are working towards these pathways to parity. And so make sure, well, I don't want to direct anyone, but I advise and encourage you to take notes so that you can get all the questions answered, and we want to hear from as many people as we can. So with that, I will turn it to you, Savi.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me? Yes. So first, I want to begin with gratitude to the San Francisco Human Rights Commission and the New School for Social Research, Derek Hamilton, and his Institute on Race, Power, and Political Economy for inviting us to participate in this discussion. My name is Savi Bisnath, and I'm the lead economist at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which is a UN organization working with the SURGE initiative. I'm here to really talk about the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And as the chair of the Human Rights Commission said yesterday, we are now in the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. It was drafted at the end of the Second World War, and it remains a crucial guide in this moment of polycrisis. It makes no distinction between civil and political rights and economic, social, cultural rights. That distinction came later and really was a result of what was happening politically in the world, the tension between capitalism and communism, and China and Russia on the one hand, and the West on the other. That tension led to the negotiation of two covenants, the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights. As you know, here in the United States, Dr. Martin Luther King began his advocacy for civil and political rights, but soon he linked his work to economic and social rights for Black Americans in particular and the country as a whole. What are economic, social, cultural rights? They are about the rights to adequate food, to adequate housing, to quality education, to quality healthcare, to social security, to water and sanitation, clean water and sanitation, and also to decent work. And by decent work, we mean work which pays well so people can have a decent standard of living, and work which comes with the ability to organize and form a union. There's been renewed attention to the importance of economic, social, cultural rights, particularly in the context of what we call the Sustainable Development Goals, and because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And especially because low and middle income countries are facing debt distress with increasing levels of poverty and inequality. Globally, without any decisive action, if we just continue to live the way we're living today, the number of people living in extreme poverty is expected to reach 600 million people by 2030. High food prices are squeezing household incomes today. And the result is that more and more people are having to skip meals. This is, of course, mainly low-income people. But this coping strategy has multiplier effects, because when you skip meals, it impacts on your nutrition, it impacts on your health, and for young children, it impacts on their ability to pay attention and focus in school. So it impacts their life chances in many ways. In terms of inequality, the poorest half of the global population barely own any wealth. They possess just 2% of the total wealth. And in terms of gender issues, men earn approximately twice as much as women across the world on average. Low and middle income countries are navigating currency devaluations, inflation, liquidity crises, and it's having severe impacts on people being able to live a decent standard of living. In April of 2023, the New School, in partnership with Professor Hamilton and his institute, OHCHR launched the human rights economy, the concept of the human rights economy. What is a human rights economy? It aims to promote business models, investment decisions, consumer choices, and consumption and production patterns that facilitate the creation of an adequate standard of living for all and a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. It centers all people, the planet, and human rights in economic, social, and environmental policies, plans, and programs, as well as decision-making. And this goes to the point which was made by Michael when he said policy is his love language, and it's a very important thing that we pay attention to. It recognizes the indivisibility of civil, cultural, economic, political, and social rights. It is intentional about addressing root causes and structural barriers to equity, justice, and sustainability. It highlights economic, social, cultural rights as essential for human dignity, inclusive development, and shared prosperity. It enhances the respect for and protection and fulfillment of human rights. It facilitates space for dialogue, scrutiny, and participation, and it promotes transparency and accountability. All of these things are very important for low and middle income communities, and for especially communities who face multiple and persistent forms of discrimination. I'm speaking about our experience in low and middle income countries, but for those of us who live in the US, we know that there are many communities who have no access to information, really, and they lack the ability to participate in any substantive way in many discussions that severely impact their lives. Our work at OHCHR is to create human rights economies that are grounded in history and context specificity. So we do not have a one-size-fits-all approach. We work as an interdisciplinary team and with a building block approach as well as an integrated approach. As Audre Lorde says, we do not live single issue lives. So we really need to look at our lives holistically and in context. We are intentional about redressing intersectional discrimination by addressing root causes and structural factors that both leave people behind but increasingly push people behind. In the American context, the lives and labor of enslaved African Americans transformed this country into a world power. The history of slavery and the structural discrimination experienced by Black Americans after are also important when we are talking about wealth, poverty, and inequality in the US context. The architecture of inequality in the US is supported by policies that discriminate against certain communities. I want to express gratitude to Director Davis for the work that she's been doing with the Human Rights Commission. We live in an interdependent and increasingly fragmented world. We see this interdependence in public health, for example, during the COVID crisis, in climate change, which we're experiencing more and more, and with the economy. The foundation of solidarity is a recognition of this human interdependence. Solidarity is not charity. Charity is admirable, but it too often fails in difficult times. In terms of the labor market, for example, we know that when wages and working conditions of the countries in the global south improve, the workers in the global north will benefit. There will be no race to the bottom, right? We experienced deindustrialization in American cities in the 1970s. The reason? Capital needed to go to cheap labor. We need to understand these things to see how we can be solidaric with each other across countries. At the global level, low and middle income countries are dealing with an international financial architecture that is plagued with inequities, gaps, and inefficiencies. The US is the most important shareholder at the IMF and the World Bank. The American public can influence what happens with loans that force countries to cut budgets for health and education and social security. OHCHR is advocating for a human rights economy as an essential pathway to reversing the underinvestment in economic, social, and cultural rights, not only in low and middle income countries, but in high income countries as well. Thank you very much.
Do some switches. Before we get to Lakeisha, Savi, there's so much that you said that's resonating with me in terms of your view, your perspective is global, and yet the examples that you raised with respect to access to quality education, with respect to having life chances and the right to health care feel so at home. And so thank you for setting that context. I want to invite Lakeisha to share. How many of you, by a show of hands the lights are bright, we can't see though, were here yesterday to hear from Lakeisha? Okay, cool. So a few folks didn't make it yesterday, which is great, because if you can just offer a bit of an overview, and perhaps you might even have thoughts that relate to what Savi shared that you can add to your overview of what you're doing on a day-to-day in leading for this country.
Yep, absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
It's a pleasure to see you again. If we were in community yesterday, Savi, thank you for that. The work you're doing is extremely important, and it's part of the reason we launched The Future in Color. So looking forward to working and building with you. So The Future in Color is one of my latest bodies of work. It is legacy work, my background and career, and I'll give an overview, but I'll offer just some different context for those of you that were here yesterday. So I started my career in the education space, worked in the nonprofit sector, economic development with organizations like the Urban League, worked with young people, did youth entrepreneurship, and also in public and private schools. So I was able to really see different infrastructure and how it reached communities and what the barriers were in terms of policies, systems, and ultimately at the end of the day, when we're working with families and people are raising their children, how that really impacts us on a day-to-day basis. I myself grew up in the inner city in Jersey City, New Jersey, and so my lived experience also was a part of building my work. And so when I began to create programs for youth entrepreneurship, adult entrepreneurship, Black entrepreneurs, I would often look at the systems that I was working in organizations and look at what was being taught globally in other countries, what was being taught sometimes in white communities here in the US that wasn't being taught in our communities. And my goal was to extract from that and to deliver and offer those trainings. And so yesterday you heard me talk a lot about scientific entrepreneurship, design thinking, things that you hear about in the tech economy and tech space, right? And so a large part of my career was spent on that. But I also realized that no matter what I did, no matter how great the programs were that I developed, that there were systems that needed to be changed and transformed and that were working against us. So that led me to large system change work. And so the Future in Color is just that. So going from being an educator to an ecosystem builder, and now the Future in Color, which is a global think to action tank. And I say think to action because data and thinking is not enough. We have to put things into action. We have to build pilots and solutions to see what works, to your point of, there's no one single lived experience, right, that we have. And so the Future in Color, one of the first initiatives that we're rolling out is the Global Black GDP. And I want to emphasize global because I think yesterday we talked a lot about the Black GDP report, which will be coming out next year, and we're going to be looking at what the Black community's contributions have been and the sectors and industries that will be creating and transferring the most wealth over the next 20 years. And so we want to accelerate the Black GDP, not focusing on our spending power, which quite frankly has been extracted and leveraged for everybody's advantage except for ours. Mm-hmm. And so we think it's important for us, one, to have that data as a community to give us agency and us really backwards designing what our economic future looks like. So you'll hear me talk a lot about economic futurism. And I know we've heard about Afrofuturism, right? And you hear economics, but what does it look like for us to have agency to shape and build the future in color, right? If you look at the data, I would argue to say now, the now is color, but the future certainly is color. If you look at the year 2045, here in the US, which there'll be a new majority, but we know that the Black community is not the majority in that majority. We look at 2050, where the largest concentration of young people will be on the continent of Africa. And so I remember being at Clinton Global Initiative 2 years ago, and Melinda Gates saying the future is Africa. But what struck me about that was that Melinda had also announced that she was going to be donating money to a research facility, medical research facility in Africa. And I thought, if the future is Africa and Melinda is deciding what to invest in and what to build, then once again, we are not shaping and having a role in building that. And so how do we flip that on its head? And so there's some work that needs to be done. So we're at the Future in Color working on backwards designing the future. There are a lot of organizations and agencies who do amazing work to look at the disparities, policies, and we want to partner with those agencies, but we want to hold space to look at what does the future look like with us writing our own story in that. And so part of the Future in Color is a movement because we want to talk about how we bring the conversation of economics down to the community level. What does that look like in your everyday life? When you leave from out of here, what does it mean for you to take an active role in being intentional and accelerating the Black GDP? What does it look like for you to want to innovate more, to get more into advocacy, to try to move towards a pathway to ownership? You might say, well, access to capital is a barrier to that. Well, we want to also look at access to wealth creation tools, right? Because there's a lot of a lot of things happen when you have young, educated Black students graduate and they go work for big companies. I have a student who I mentored her entire life. She works for Blackstone now in New York. And one of the things she told me, she said, Ms. French, she said, I was just a little frustrated because when I started getting my first paycheck, I was really excited because I was the first person in my family that was, making this amount of money. I was making, high six figures. She said, but when we all went to lunch, like all the other kids were like, she says kids, but they're adults, obviously. She's like, they're talking about how, they've sat down with their mom and dad and they have plans for their money, right? They have a financial coach, they have a family wealth manager, and so that stuff just is happening second nature for them, and so for me, I'm like, well, how do I make it to where my mom doesn't feel the pressure of having to put gas in the tank next week, it's different. And so when we say, oh, well, go, get that job and then invest that money, how about we come up with programs where we give, first-time college graduate students who get into a career and give them a wealth manager for 3 or 4 years, right? And so those are the types of solutions that we're going to be moving through our Think to Action tank. How do we create something like a Black GDP and give it utility, have what we're calling value creation salons, which is gonna follow the report. We don't just want the data for the purpose of having it, we want it to empower you, but then we wanna get together with the industries and sectors and look at how do we accelerate the Black GDP? How do we create opportunities for more wealth and value creation, right? Because we're not asking for handouts. And so I would say the Black GDP is also important from a global perspective because the slave trade helped to transform the entire world's economy. And so what we want to look at, so the US will be the first GDP report, but then we want to look at the 20 countries that will lead in GDP by 2050. And we want to look at the Black GDP, and we're also taking into account the transatlantic slave trade map. And and that's really important as other organizations do work to build solutions. And so, that is our body of work, and human-centered value exchange, I will say, is what's important for us. It's important that when we talk about the workforce, when we talk about AI, how jobs are being transformed, the careers of the future don't exist yet. We have to change the way in which we exchange value as human beings when we work. So I believe that the employer-employee relationship is going to have to be drastically shifted and changed. I do not believe it's going to be sustainable for the future. Every person I talk to, if they work for a great company, they will tell you, I work for XYZ. But if you get a little deeper into that conversation, they'll start to say, well, I have my, my company, on the side, or, I'm really good at this, or I'm really good. And they're frustrated because they don't feel like they can bring that to the table in their current organization, or two, they can bring it, but they're not going to be valued. And I think Michelle talked about that earlier. And so we have to think about contracts, employer-employee relationships, and how things like blockchain. So this is some of the things that we're looking at as well, how blockchain paired with the data of something like a Black GDP report can help us. So when you go for a job interview or go to the negotiation table, you have data that's backing you up. You're no longer having emotionally driven conversations about how much, Black and brown communities have contributed to this. The numbers are there, so know your numbers. And I'm really speaking to the audience because we want you guys to walk away and have something tangible and have utility to be able to go and say, how can I think about this differently the next thing I do when I walk out of this door, have a different conversation. And so hopefully that is what the Future in Color is able to help do, is really take this economic work that we're all doing, this large systems change work that we're fighting every single day for you guys. The Future in Color's goal is to help to give you guys agency and participating in that so that you feel it in your everyday life, and that we're able to finally have some sort of pathway to creating a future where we all feel valued, from a human-centered perspective.
Now, I know y'all got questions after that. But first, you talked a lot, Lakeisha, about the several suggested programs and really what localities can do. And I want to go to our city treasurer, Jose, around your office has essentially used data, local and regional data, to inform many of the programs that you all implement to combat racial wealth disparities, economic disparities, and to advance economic justice. So if you can let us know, for those of us who are constituents in the city and Bay Area-wide friends, what is the Treasurer's Office leading? How are you addressing this issue for the communities that you serve?
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Jose Cisneros, San Francisco Treasurer. I am thrilled to be here with these esteemed speakers who are doing great work, if not all around the country, all around the world. And you're right, we're looking at our own little backyard here. And we're doing a lot of work that I'm very proud of because we wanted to find out how we could help people. I'll confess, the Treasurer's Office has a lot of people who know a lot about how to handle money. The full title is Treasurer Tax Collector's Office. We hate to do money all the time, every day. We take care of the city's money. But we knew that we could probably find ways to help local people be more successful with their money. And at the end of the day, isn't that what drives a lot of our own personal success, is how we are able to manage our money and use our finances to achieve goals that make a difference. So we started almost 20 years ago working at this type of, looking at these types of projects. And we noticed a number of things that it looked like we could make a difference on. One of them was we saw that there were a lot of particularly low-income people who didn't even have a bank account. And when someone, this was news to me, I've always had a bank account, and I've always known people with bank accounts, but there are plenty of people who grew up not knowing anybody in their family who had a bank account. And what happens is if someone doesn't have a bank account, every time they get paid, they have nowhere to go with their paycheck but one of these check cashers. I think of them as a ripoff, but they're completely legal. But if you take every one of your paychecks all year to a check casher, it's going to cost you $500 or $600 or more just to cash your paycheck. Whereas a bank account hopefully would cost a whole lot less, and you could save all that money to support your family. So we started a program that connected folks to safe and affordable accounts, and we ultimately, and put the word out, we used the city's voice. The same city voice that said things like, hey, lock your doors at night, stay safe, check your smoke detectors, get health care that we can help you provide with. And so we said, if you don't have a bank account, get a bank account. And we moved tens of thousands of local folks from being unbanked to banked, and those folks now could save that money they were spending on check cashers. But it went even further, to a point that you guys were making earlier. We wanted to find out how we could help people throughout their journey. And one of the things that we found was people really could use help understanding best how to handle their money. So now we actually adopted a program that was started in another city, but we actually provide people with a one-on-one financial counselor, a financial coaching session that says, let's take a look at your credit report. Most people have never seen their credit report. Let's take a look at your credit report. Let's have a one-on-one conversation. Let's see how much outstanding debt. Let's see what your income is. Let's see what your savings, and if you have a bank account. And what we found is just after a couple of sessions with each of our clients, we could help them develop more savings, pay down their debt or even negotiate it down, and ultimately improve their credit score by dozens of points so they would be more successful going forward. The other program I want to mention is we heard about research that showed about kids and their ability and the percentage of the kids that grow up and end up going to college or some form of advanced education after high school. I don't think it comes as a surprise to anybody that the overwhelming majority of kids that grow up in wealthy families end up going to college. And a very high percentage of kids that grow up in middle-income families also go to college. But kids that grow up into black, brown, and poor families, far fewer of them feel empowered and ultimately end up going to college. There was a study that showed that if a child grows up with a college savings account in the child's name, that presence of that account built aspirations, and that child was 3 times more likely to go to college and 4 times more likely to finish college if they just had that savings account there to build aspirations. And it didn't matter the income of the family. It didn't matter if they saved a lot or a little money in that account. It was all about building aspirations. So over a dozen years ago, we started our program here called Kindergarten to College. We partner with our public school district, and we automatically every year open up a college savings account for every incoming kindergartner. As of last year, every child in our local public school district has a college savings account that was opened up by the city. We put an initial deposit. We put an initial deposit of $50 in the account, and we encourage the parents to save. Today, all those accounts, those thousands of accounts we've opened, now contain $15 million, and 2/3 of that money was put there by the families themselves, including the poorest families in our city have found a way to save for their kids' college education. I like to say those millions of dollars represent millions of conversations that those families and those children are having about college and the opportunities that education after high school can benefit them and help them get to whatever success they want to be when they grow up. We want to see that every child that grows up in San Francisco has the opportunity to succeed and do whatever they feel they want to do and be whoever they want to be. That's kind of the story about the first few programs we started with, but I do want to talk quite seriously about something we started reflecting on about a half dozen years ago. And that is that people were telling us that even fines and fees and costs that we, the local government, we, the city and county of San Francisco, were putting on them were causing problems. And we thought, that can't be us. We don't harm people. We're not here to hurt people. But in fact, we were, and in some cases still are. I can tell you some really serious examples. We talked to a woman named Mary who had served her time in jail, had gotten out, had gotten sober, had put her life back together, had been reunited with her teenage daughter, and she was looking to stand her and her daughter and her family up into a successful household. But we, the city and county of San Francisco, were serving her a debt, an unpaid bill of $1,800 because we were charging her and everybody else on probation $60 a month for being on probation. Wow. How does that make any sense at all? Someone coming out of prison does not have $60 a month to pay for probation, nor should they be worried about something like that, because we want them to put their lives back together. We want them to find an apartment. Not only were we trying to take that money away from Mary and every other ex-offender in San Francisco, but when they didn't pay it, we reported it to the credit companies and it lowered their credit score. Something, yet again, harming individuals and slowing down their opportunities to get a job and find a place to live. When we shared that information with our policymakers in San Francisco, they were shocked. And there's no excuse for it, but honestly, people didn't know how bad our actions were hurting people. They immediately canceled all of those criminal justice fees, and they went even a step further and erased all the outstanding debt on people's credit reports. People saw their credit scores jump overnight just because we took off this ridiculous amount that was owed. We also had a program where we were charging people, and this happens almost everywhere. If you're in prison, if you're in our county jail, and you make a telephone call, it was $2, $3 for a 10-minute call. And I know you'll be shocked, but prisoners don't have a lot of money in their pocket to pay for these calls. So you know who ends up paying for these calls? Spouses, parents, siblings, or family members, to the point where they're paying hundreds of dollars a month or for the time that their relative is incarcerated just to do very legitimate things like talk to their attorney. We worked with the folks running our jail, and we, like a number of other cities, now have made jail phone calls free so that people are not burdened that way with ridiculous costs that they cannot afford. I love to tell this last example because, I think we've all been there, right? We all get parking tickets. We've all parked in the wrong place at one time or another, and if you park in the I've been there. In San Francisco, you might have heard we're a very expensive city. Our parking tickets are very expensive. And even more expensive is if you park in a place where we need to clear out the cars during rush hour, and you get your car towed, day one, if you try and go retrieve your car, it's nearly $500 to get your car back. Nearly half of the families in this country don't have $400 or $500 sitting around waiting to cover an emergency expense. So what happened? The poorest families here that got their car towed, they lost the car. They lost the car. They could not afford to get their car back. Well, what happens? If a low-wage family loses their car, does that mean a parent can't get to work? If they can't get to work, does that mean they lose their job? If they lose their job, does that mean they can't afford to pay their rent? Does anybody think parking in the wrong place deserves a family becoming homeless because they couldn't pay their rent? Of course not. Of course not. So here's what we said. We said, if somebody breaks a rule, there should be a consequence, of course. You can't just have people breaking rules all over the place. But the consequence needs to be right-sized so that it fits people more or less as best we can do equally. And $500 hits a wealthy person far differently than a middle-income person or, as I just said, a low-income person. So now we took that $500 charge, and if someone is below 200% of the federal poverty level, that gets 80% of it gets wiped away, and they get the car back for $100. And nobody's losing their cars anymore and causing major strife for their families. These are the kinds of things that we're working on, and I know we have more work to do in these areas, but I think this speaks volumes about the way government, and honestly, I swear to God, we all thought we were doing the best we possibly could do, and we certainly weren't harming people to the tune of maybe causing someone severe pain from financial problems. But we just have to really look closely at what we're doing and find out how we can do better and how we can support people, in fact, the neediest people in our community, so that they're not being overburdened or penalized for things that we could have just done differently. I think this holds true at all levels of government. I'm proud of what we're doing in San Francisco. When we do it, we share it with all the other cities and counties and governments that we can find, and many of them are picking up our programs and doing them as well. I say many times they actually do them better than we do them, and we copy back what they improved on with our ideas. So we're not in competition with each other. We're share and share alike. But I'm very proud of what we've done here. But what I'd like to say to all of you on the panel and all of you in the audience, we really want to learn what we can do even better and more and differently in the future. So my ask to you is, please ask me anything you want about the programs we've launched and the successes we've had, but please bring me ideas or problems or issues that you're aware of so we can maybe tackle some more things in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have, I know there are so many burning questions in the audience. I want to turn it to Erica really quickly before we get to the audience questions about what you are doing and leading in the tech space, and plus work that you've done previously before you joined the tech space. We heard this morning about AI and about the who's coding, and then there was a reference to the new gym code. And so what can you share with us around tech, AI, how that will or is currently influencing economic rights, economic justice, and how is it being used to either grow or narrow racial wealth disparities?
Absolutely. So thank you all for having me, and I'm really excited about this conversation because it connects with what each of the panelists have spoken about. So first, I want to bring up the topic of innovation waves. So we have these innovation waves that last for 40 to 70 years per wave, and they shift the way economies operate, social and political structures, and how people interact. You know, when we think about the major innovation waves over the last 100 years, the freight train, automobiles, the internet, social media, now generative AI. And what we see is that those who are well poised to contribute to these innovation waves, participate in them, have the opportunity to create a tremendous amount of wealth. We notice that these innovation waves can disrupt companies. We think about Kodak. We think about Radio Shack. We think about Blockbuster. These businesses either no longer exist or exist in a smaller scale because they could not quickly adopt to the technology changes that were happening in their industry. Fast forward and you think about these innovation waves, since the birth of the internet, most of the innovation is grounded on the internet. And when we think about adoption and access, it creates a new barrier for how Black and brown communities can contribute. So Microsoft has this digital equity map, and I took a look at it yesterday, and I wanted to compare 4 states: Washington State, California, Mississippi, and Alabama. And the through line was the percentage of people without access to the internet at home. For Washington State and California, that percentage was 1 to 3%. When you think about Mississippi and Alabama, it's 12 to 19% of folks who just do not have the access to the internet. So you think about innovation. You think about COVID and how we had to quickly shift to homeschooling. Now there's a new phenomenon that work from home. So if you live in a community, a city, or state without a company that you're interested in, you might not want to work at the Piggly Wiggly, right? You've trained, you've gone to college, you moved back, and you want to work for a major company. If your city, a community, a neighborhood doesn't have access to broadband, you can't capitalize on the work from home momentum, right? And so continuing to have these structures that are preventing people of color from having full participation and access to the digital economy. And then we move to adoption rates. So everyone is looking at me. Some of you all seem eager. Others seem like, okay, I'm sitting here, so I'm gonna make this interactive. So I'm gonna ask you a question, and the question is, how long did it take for this technology to reach 100 million users? The first one is the mobile phone. How many years of how much time do you think it took to generate 100 million mobile phone users? Just throw out some dates, some years. 16 years. 16 years for 100 million people to use our mobile phone. Let's fast forward to the internet. Give me a number. 7 years to reach 100 million users. Facebook. 4.5 years. Generative AI, ChatGPT.
3 days.
3 months. A statistic that I saw today was 64 days to reach 100 million users. 64 days. Think about the speed of technology advancement, the speed of adoption, and the infrastructure that's needed for our communities to participate. Now, why is this so important? Why am I here to talk about generative AI in a setting about economic parity, economic power, and human rights? I see generative AI as an equity tool. It eliminates the reliance on people for deep subject matter expertise. You have access to tools that can augment and subsidize knowledge that you might not have. And you can accelerate the speed of market for an idea. I sat on a technology panel last week at Venture Atlanta. My colleague from M12, which is Microsoft's venture capital firm, talked about there was a woman-owned business they were investing in. The estimated number of hours for a software developer to focus on their product was 1,000 hours. With generative AI, they were able to reduce that to 50 hours. Think about the cost savings. So that's 950 hours of work that you don't have to pay for anymore. think about your speed to market. So now you've reduced from taking, say, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, a year to create this product. Now you've accelerated it. And then when you add on the opportunity to leverage tools and insights on developing marketing strategies, accounting, who are investing in these products. Now you are democratizing access to information and tools that were not available or not accessible for those of us who are of color, and think about the number of barriers of opportunity. How many of people in the room have had a genius idea that you did not launch because you either didn't have the experts surrounding you to give you insights, you didn't have the funding to pay for a marketer, an accountant, a financial planner, a technologist, or you just didn't know how? How many people have been like hindered, a dream deferred? Well, you're in that space right Yes. So,
health space up in there, and I'm in that space right now. Damn, I just can't. I've been thinking about it for a whole year now, and still ain't got it done. But I'm finna do it. I'm telling you. So I need some help.
so I'm going to tell you what your help is. Bing Chat is Microsoft's version of ChatGPT. To prepare for this talk, yesterday I was thinking, like, oh my gosh, I need these statistics. What am I going to add? And what did I do? I sat at my desk, Bing Chat. What is the impact of innovation waves on Black and brown communities? Gave me everything that I wanted. Oh, I need statistics on adoption of critical technology and innovation waves. It provided me with the information that I just shared on how quickly it took to generate 100 million users. This is what we have at our like assets now. And so from a Microsoft perspective, we want everyone to have basic digital fluency and generative AI fluency. If you have a LinkedIn account, you can access a free generative AI learning path. It's asynchronous online. We're developing prompt engineering pathways and et cetera, recognizing that the more people who have access, and not just access, understand it from a conceptual perspective and a theory of it, but can apply it. I had to write reviews for my staff. On a flight from Redmond back to Atlanta, I wrote 4 reviews. I put in, like, these are my key points that I want to say about my staff. ChatGPT wrote it. I reviewed it. I dropped in the names, and this person didn't really do this well. And it was efficient. I did that in 4 hours. And so how we're positioning this, yes, there's concerns about displacement. Right now, though, this is an opportunity for you to increase your productivity so that you can focus on innovation, creativity, and what you desire. So we have a nonprofit training program that we just launched in Atlanta. It's a generative AI experiential lab for nonprofit employees, managers, and leaders to teach them how do you automate workflows, how do you use it for data analytics, how do you use it for researching for your grants, so they can optimize, do that really quickly, and spend the rest of their time focused on writing those grants, improving service delivery, and touching the customer base. And so when I think about how we need to generate wealth for ourselves, and the Black GDP, which is really assessing what is our contribution and innovation to financial contribution to world economies, with generative AI, we have the opportunity to accelerate and own and create. And we have our own value, our own human-centered value creation. So that's why I'm here. I hope you all are energized. Don't be afraid of the technology. If it's scary, research it, use it, because out of that 100 million, most people were 18 to 34, and most were male. And I couldn't get the demographics on race. but there are people who are already changing their business models for their companies to leverage this technology. And we can't sit back and watch it happen. We have to participate and contribute.
Wow. Thank you, Erica. So what I heard was I could become economically wealthy if I use generative AI in 64 days. No, I'm just playing. Okay, so we want to go to Q&A. I see D'Anthony, and then I see this person down here. I see you, and we're going to
All
get
right.
to
Well,
you.
I'm using my mic check privileges so I can ask my question every day.
Go-
I'm
go
gonna start
ahead,
doing
John
it.
Henry,
But I'm gonna
please.
push back a little bit on it, and I know it's not about so much the fear, but I was just doing some research on when you look at 13 billion jobs being removed, how that's going to impact the Black community. Yeah, if you're a creator, if you're an entrepreneur, it's great. But when you look at the workplace for our young people across this nation are afraid. It is a great tool. You can do a lot of things, but when you look at the labor market, it's very scarcity for a lot of young people in the future. You see it in the hospital now. Part of this Kaiser strike right now is because robotics is replacing nurses. Even here at UCSF, they have robots now that's doing surgeries, passing out medicine, doing vitals. So where do those jobs go? And then for the city attorney, treasurer, wanted to talk about the businesses. I know you talked about the program for the cars. A lot of folks, I get emails and information about small businesses being impacted, trying to keep their taxes and how quick they get put into collections and messing up their opportunities. What programs that you are looking at helping small businesses, especially in the Black and brown community, that go through those struggles, making payroll and trying to keep up with the taxes and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it's true. There's automation that is happening. AI is contributing to that automation. But when you think about the innovation waves, there are jobs that become obsolete and there are jobs that are created. Who would have thought 25 years ago that a person can become a millionaire creating videos on TikTok? Digital influencers didn't exist 10, 15 years ago. So yes, there's a risk of certain jobs becoming obsolete, but then there are the other jobs that are created. And honestly, most of the conversation around generative AI isn't the impact on the workers in retail and et cetera. It's really white collar jobs that are at risk. Marketers are concerned. I know at Microsoft, our engineers created a product for our attorneys to help them create contracts faster. And so we're thinking about how can we use it to augment so that we can accelerate the mundane and provide the opportunity to focus on what generative AI can't solve. Right now, it can respond to your prompt, but you still need a human to write the prompt. You still need a human with lived experiences to write the prompt. And so it provides opportunities for folks who are not in typical innovative fields. So if you're in school for computer science and engineering, in the past, that was considered those who were prepared for the innovation economy. Now with generative AI, you have English majors, social scientists, epidemiologists who are in position to create value and to contribute in a way that we haven't seen before.
Thank you.
Small business issues, I completely not only understand what you're talking about, but we've heard this issue before. I can't tell you how many, particularly entrepreneurs, one and two person businesses, come and particularly bring stories of the existing banks don't offer help and programs and financing and support the way we think they should. And actually, we just put out, I'm really thrilled you brought this up, we just put out an RFI, request for information, from banks and credit unions here in San Francisco saying, please just tell us what you'll do for the smallest businesses. And I gotta be honest, we got very little in the way of replies, which is proving to us the city needs to find a way to get involved and bring more help to businesses. we actually go out of our way, the city, to find the smallest businesses, the black and brown businesses, and try and deliver contracts to them. But they will still need financing lines, credit lines, receivables financing, things like that, to build their businesses to stay successful. So we're working on that. Please stay tuned.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add a little bit to it. One of the things I would say is when we talk about our community not being left behind, and to Erica's point about tech advancement and the fourth industrial revolution, we have to build bigger. Black business is not small business. We have to think about our children the same way, with every onset of technology and advancement, we can't depend on the school systems because they move slow. And I'm just gonna be real here, y'all. They're making changes, but they're behind. The pandemic made it even worse. So when your kids get home, or your nieces, your nephews, your cousins, introduce them to ChatGPT or Bing Chat. Introduce them to Bing Chat. I have an 11-year-old. I let him explore ChatGPT. I let him do it based on his interests. He's into Zelda, and I'm like, oh, why don't you make a script for that is what we have to start doing. So it's gonna require us to shift and change. The jobs aren't necessarily being replaced, they're being repurposed. And so we have to stop, and this is maybe an unpopular opinion, but there's some organizations like in Atlanta, and we've had several conversations, and they say, well, we want to help, black entrepreneurs build the businesses they want. We want, our moms and dads and our grandparents who had these great recipes or who, had this certain thing that they did, and we want them to turn that into a business, we want to meet them where they are. We're not able to do that anymore. We have to start being real with people and with ourselves. If you're starting a business right now, if you have a current business, you need to pause, carve some time out, and as hard as it may be, you may even be working 2 or 3 jobs. I know people who live back home in Jersey, they work 3 jobs just to pay their rent because of the cost of rent right now. But you have to find time to think about, if I'm gonna open a restaurant, if I'm gonna start a sauce line, I don't care what it is, you have to build it for the future. We can no longer build, we just can't. And so even when you think about AI, generative AI, most black businesses are sole proprietorships because we are not able to pay for employees. That's a statistic. And so if we're able to then utilize ChatGPT, any generative AI to help us to build capacity as we build out our ideas, to even get others to come on board and to do those things, that's how we have to start thinking. But we have to start challenging one another. And then when people offer to support us in building our businesses and they ask, what do you need? How can you help me? Right? I need to understand what I can do to get my business ready for the economy of the future. Right? And not programs based off of things 10, 15 years ago. So I just wanted to share that. We just have to, I know it's not the best. Yes, we meet people where they are, but we also have to go into the future, and we got to start building for the customers that we want to be able to serve, and sustainable businesses. Because if you don't do that, your business will not make it.
And Savi, I know you,
Just think about it. So prior to Microsoft, I worked in philanthropy for a major national foundation. And I was responsible for conducting a study on black businesses in Atlanta. And near our Atlanta University Center, we have 50 to 75 black businesses that are in a 1 to 2 mile radius, and wanted to understand what was their capacity to adapt. And most of them are retailers, so food, incense, shea butter. And what they were averse to was Uber Eats and online retail and shopping. And so, we went door to door and talked. And so finally, we were like, if you've survive this pandemic, you have to pivot your business model. And the technology is what that sustain them. So when Lakeisha talks about future-proofing your business, you think about cybersecurity, the shift from the focus on large companies to nonprofits and small businesses, thinking about the technology you can integrate to operationalize arts and conduct research. We had an event last week. A young man stood up. He said he's using ChatGPT. He wants to start a t-shirt brand. So he used ChatGPT to identify the most popular slogans that are not trademarked. Then he chose the slogan, researched the trademarking process, and he's using like the Amazon Business Center where you can just send your like design, Amazon will print the t-shirt and sell it. He launched his business in like 2 weeks. And I was like, wow, like that is real economic power. And this is how we shift to get political power.
Thank you. I'll be quiet. Savi.
Thank you. I'd like to say some things about the human rights framework. Within the human rights framework, there's the idea of the duty bearer and the rights holder. As people, we are rights holders, and the government is the duty bearer. I think it's important in this discussion, especially if we're talking about the role of the private sector and the ways in which individuals can become entrepreneurs. What then is the role of the duty bearer? What is the role of the government? At the very least, the role of the government should ensure that everyone has an adequate standard of living. The fact that someone is working 3 jobs should be in question for us, right? Are we going to say to the person who's working 3 jobs, work your 3 jobs, and then find the slogan and engage with Microsoft? And is Microsoft going to be regulated in such a way that a lot of the profit goes back to that person who's working 3 jobs and now in effect has a 4th job? So I think it's really important that we should aspire to own a company if that's what we want. But we also need to understand that we cannot do this on our own. We need community, but we also need public policy, right? And this is what Treasurer Cisneros has been doing. He has been trying to see the ways in which there are these unintentional policies that discriminate against certain people, okay? In his case, he's looking at the level of income, but we know who are at the bottom in terms of levels of income. They are people who are black and brown. Even to this day in California, one of the richest states in the country and among the most wealthy in the world, right? So I think it's important that we bring in not only these very important elements that the colleagues on the panel are bringing up, but also how do we hold the state to account? How do we hold the state to account for the years of persistent discrimination and slavery, and that brings up reparations? How do we hold the state of account for all the years afterwards, the structural discrimination which positioned people to live in certain communities within certain zip codes, which did not get the kind of funding in public schools that were necessary to then create people who could access high-skilled jobs, right? That is a reality. How do we first confront that reality, and how do we work with government to ensure, one, that doesn't continue, and 2, how do we then bring people who've been discriminated against up, right? That's what substantive equality is about, right? We see it in the race. There's a cartoon about people who are running a race. Typically, in the American context, the white male, no barriers, right? Black men, barriers. Black women, more barriers. Latinx people, additional barriers. Native Americans, we know what the situation is for Native Americans. So yes, it's important to bring up these things that are linked to the private sector, but we need more. And actually, as rights holders, we are deserving of more from the government. We need to ask for what we know is necessary from the government, and then we need to hold the government to account. I'll just say one thing about the private sector. I think it's really also important for us to understand that the private sector now has been making a tremendous amount of profit, but that profit is not reinvested into the communities. That profit goes to tax shelters. There's a lot of tax avoidance. But this is money, actually, that should be going to the state. It should be going to the federal government. That's the money that will help to fund quality education. It will help to fund quality health care. President Biden has signed on to an international minimum global tax. He is advocating for corporations to pay their fair share. He wanted 25%. At this moment, it's 15%. All of these things are very important when we think about communities who have been pushed behind, and more communities who are being left behind. Thank you.
Thank you. Some truth-telling. There's a colleague of mine who works with the Huey P. Newton Foundation, Xavier Buck, and he talks a lot about the Black Panther Party and the tenets of the Black Panther Party and how they started as a community food program because the Black community particularly wasn't getting access to food. And so their intentional investment in community started to allow people to ask, well, why was I hungry in the first place? And so when you talk about policy and talk about the folks who have to work 2 and 3 jobs just so they can sustain, we start to ask questions, well, why do I have to work 2 and 3 jobs in the first place to get the basic needs of what it takes to live on a daily? So we have about 10 minutes left, and can I get a show of hands for who has questions? Raise them high. All right, so I see 6 hands. We're going to take these 6 hands, and maybe the panelists, maybe one person respond and keep that little ticker up there, probably like 45 seconds for a response. And then, of course, this is the point where I'm going to encourage folks to connect with them afterwards. Like, keep the conversations going. So we're going to go DeAnthony and then work our way all the way to James.
And Dr. Sai, real quick, for people that's parked, there is 3 o'clock towing out there. Some folks that got their cars towed last time. So
let them know we got the treasurer here.
What did I say?
Got 7 minutes.
Watch that towing.
Now the treasurer gonna let you know that your ticket is due. But just briefly, I know there's a lot of excitement with AI. But
and Brother DeAnthony, just one more thing. Let's make these questions. And so, yes, you can offer a bit of context, but we want to get to the questions, too.
And we saw during the pandemic how many communities, especially Black and brown communities, are still struggling with the digital divide. No internet access. So my question is, how can we trust AI when some folks don't even have a computer, know how to use one to access the technology? And how do whose intelligence informs artificial intelligence?
So yes, I think the baseline first is basic digital fluency. And so that's what we're focused on in Atlanta, is making sure people understand how to use the computer, how to use the internet to apply for a job, how to use it to manage your everyday life, and then you build upon with generative AI. So not discarding that. And then I would encourage people to lean on their city, lean on private sector. In Detroit, the city did not have any internet access, and the companies weren't willing to come and install it, so they created a municipal broadband footprint. You can create open access broadband infrastructures that allow you to subsidize it and sell that to a carrier, and that city receives income. So there's a lot of different models that are available to ensure or to expand access, but basic digital fluency is the first step.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very fortunate to hear this wisdom coming from this wonderful group of people. Dr. Bisnath referred to the harm that has been caused to developing countries by predatory loans from Western countries. We know that debt has been used for centuries to harm Black Americans, so-called indentured servitude, people thrown into jail for failure to pay car tickets, parking tickets. And yet, the solution that we keep hearing for global development, economic development, is loans, microloans. Youth development programs are teaching teenagers to pitch investors. Is it time to stop teaching debt? Is it time for governments and NGOs to emphasize business development grants instead of loans?
Thank you.
I would love to answer that, and if you wanted to add. One of the projects that we worked on during the pandemic for the Future in Color, we worked on some pilots, and we launched a project that Erica was a part of called the Green Project. And the purpose of the Green Project was to, and this is what led us to the Black GDP report. There were a lot of organizations and entities coming together to invest money into, Black business, and now, it was a thing now, right? And so we want to support Black businesses. But what we realized was that, to your point, traditional loans, all these different forms of capital that existed, the question we asked was, is this the type of funding and investment in our businesses that's needed for Black businesses? How can you create loan programs when you don't really understand the trajectory of Black business because you haven't taken the time to really understand it? As Black entrepreneurs ourselves, we haven't had the data, the information. We barely know our history in terms of our ancestors. So how in the world do we continue to perpetuate the same system of capitalism, the same structures, when they were built for white businesses, not Black businesses? And so PNC, for instance, put together like a coalition, and they were working on solutions and coming up with different loan programs. What are the different financial support systems that we can create that are different and that are shaped around our lived experience instead of having to fit us into the existing boxes that exist, to your point? So I think there's a lot of work to be done in understanding the root causes, but also the cultural nuances that is in entrepreneurship and business. We are a village-centered people, and so we build differently. The way our businesses grow, the stages of business that they build loan programs around, even grant programs, though, to be honest, because I'm not sure that the existing grant programs are even shaped around us. Do we really understand what the stages of business are for a Black or Latino, or different types of businesses? We don't. We're still just going off of assumptions or existing information that's there and using the same stages of business. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of investing in the data, investing in understanding not just quantitative, but qualitative data to really understand the different. There's not one type of Black person, one type of Latino person. And then how are the businesses over time that have been built, how do those families or those communities build businesses? And then what are the stages of businesses within that? And then what are the types of capital that are needed for that? So I think that's the work.
So at the international level, the Secretary General of the United Nations has called for reform of the international financial architecture. And he's arguing that the World Bank and the IMF, the Bretton Woods institutions, were formed right after the Second World War, at a time when most countries in the global south were colonies. So they were not at the table and they did not make decisions. And he's arguing that it is time that there's a reform where countries in the global south who are now independent can also have a voice and a seat at the table. In terms of your question for young people in the US and going into debt, I would point to Professor Hamilton's idea, and which he's now implementing in several places, of the baby bond. And he'll probably talk about it more in the next session. But his idea, I think, is quite so useful and radical at the same time, because you invest in a person, a child, and that child grows up and has access to money that has been invested for them. And they can then use that to start a business if necessary. But I'll leave it up to him to say more. I don't know if he'll want to add anything now. Over.
Thank you. And I think I saw 6 hands, but I only see 2 current ones. So we're going to take both of these together. So if you can state your question, and then we'll come to James.
Okay. Got it. I guess I wanted to quickly make a comment because digital equity came up. I wanted to plug the work that the San Francisco Department of Technology and the Mayor's Office of Housing Community Development, the Digital Equity Division, have been doing to provide digital literacy to communities in San Francisco, to provide free Wi-Fi and high-speed internet And, you know, I guess a big thanks to the mayor for supporting those initiatives and having that in her targets. But I guess the question I had for the panelists is, in a climate of scarcity, where we're talking about how tax revenues in the city are going down, what role can the government play in kind of bringing equity? And also, like, for me, representing the San Francisco Department of Technology, what can we do to provide technology and more digital equity beyond what we're currently doing, especially given these like financial challenges?
All right, let's get this second question as y'all are preparing your responses. So the role of government in bringing digital equity. Okay.
Thank you to the panel. I just wanted to ask, with the White House, Joe Biden is creating a President's Advisory Council on the African diaspora engagement in the United States. And essentially my question is, how important is it for those of us who identify as descendants of Africans to engage with the continent and build global economies? And yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
All right, digital equity and engagement with the continent for those of us who identify as descendants of Africa.
Can I just say thank you, first of all, to the Department of Technology for the city. They've done fantastic work to levelize a lot of the playing field and fill a lot of gaps. In partnership, I think, a lot of times with the library, which is a great system of bringing access to a lot of folks in every community in San Francisco. I will say that good point about the mayor and the reach out being done to help folks. But one of the things the mayor has also done recently is reached out to the treasurer and the controller and asked exactly the question I think that you just asked, which is how is our current tax and financial structure, which does rely on pulling revenue, pulling taxes from businesses large and small, need to be retuned and need to be revised, given everything that's now happened. The voters brought in the business tax that we have today more than 10 years ago, and a lot of things have happened in 10 years. We're looking at what changes need to be made, and a lot of it has to do with relieving burdens on small businesses. Of course, whatever we come up with would have to be passed by the voters, so it's not something the mayor and the city can change by itself.
Thank you. And then to the question about the role of folks engaging with the continent to build global economies.
I'll speak real quickly to the future in color. So one of the reasons we created a global Black GDP, and the reason it says global, is because we were looking at how we can harness our assets and come from a place of abundance and not scarcity. And one of the phrases that we say all the time is that we have enough. We have enough. And so the collective, which is, again, why we wanted the data and the numbers, but when you think about the fourth industrial revolution, technology advancement, you look at countries across the continent of Africa and African-American businesses, Black businesses, and connecting together. When you think about manufacturing and how we can make a country in Africa the next chocolate capital, right? So those are the types of conversations and things we want to come from that type of data, and how we can get together and look at how to accelerate the global Black GDP to ensure that we are represented and that we are intentional about that. And so there's been a lot of global trade missions that have been happening between the continent and here in the U.S. I can give you some of the organizations, if we talk after, that are doing that with the Future in Color. I know we are, talking about, we're already in talks with folks on the continent, and Brazil as well, with the large, representation of a Black community. And so I think there's dialogue that needs to happen. For that to happen, so we have to engage more in that and come out of these, break down these silos and cross-capacity build. So that's work that needs to happen, and it's critical, I think, for our communities.
So I have 2 points. One, to the question on scarcity. In fact, we are living at a time where there are more billionaires than ever before. So we need to interrogate, really, is there scarcity, or is there something else that is happening where the role of the government is very important then, right? Because as I shared, President Biden is talking about a global minimum tax, and many countries are talking about a progressive tax. Instead of taxing low and middle income people with value-added taxes, et cetera, can we look at a progressive tax, which several people have brought up, including Elizabeth Warren, where people are taxed based on their income and wealth, wealth being key to this discussion. And it's not someone who's making 100,000 or 250,000. She's talking about people who are making millions. So I do think it's important for us to think about that when we think about scarcity. On the question of trade with African countries, I think it's really important for us to first recognize that there are many people on the African continent who are quite competent and capable, right? And they are developing their products, they are participating in value chains, they are trading. However, one of the most important things to know is that the trade rules are rigged in some ways against them. So there's a need for fairer trading rules. And I think that when one is sitting in a powerful country, which often sets the rules, one then has a responsibility to advocate for rules that are fairer for all, right? And that would be an important thing to do. Thank you.
And then I would just add to that, we are always thinking of exporting our knowledge, our goods to the continent. So I moved to Nigeria in 2008 to help build a cashless-based ecosystem. And what we learned of was M-Pesa in Kenya. So in 2008, they were sending money to each other via the mobile phone. And in the US, we're still focusing on, can we switch to chip and pin on our debit cards? And they already had chip and pin. So I think part of it is thinking about how can we tap into the innovation in an equitable way that's being developed on the continent to help to elevate it and create opportunities to provide capital and expansion to their products. So Zelle, Cash App, all of those are a model of M-Pesa that was created in 2006. And that's, I think, is a mindset shift as well to thinking about who is innovative.
Thank you. And with that, I think that was the appropriate place to close. Let's give it up for our panelists, Savi Bisnath, Lakeisha French, Erica Smith, and José Cisneros.